Aisha was 71 the morning her hands betrayed her. She had been sitting at her kitchen table, spoon poised over a bowl of oatmeal, when a sudden stiffness locked her fingers in place. The spoon clattered against the ceramic, echoing louder than it should have in the quiet of her home. She stared at her trembling hand, wondering if this was simply what age does, stripping strength away piece by piece, or if something more insidious was unfolding inside her. That moment, small and ordinary to an onlooker, felt like a warning bell only she could hear. Later that week, her doctor confirmed what she feared but didn't yet understand. Her joints showed early signs of arthritis, her energy levels were dipping, and her digestion was slowing in ways she had never experienced before. "It's normal at your age," the doctor said, almost casually, as though the discomfort she felt was inevitable. But Aisha knew better. She had lived a life of discipline, raising her children with wholesome meals, filling her plate with vegetables, leafy greens, and salads. She had followed all the rules, and still her body seemed to be unraveling. That contradiction left her restless, searching. I share her story with you because I have watched too many men and women cross this threshold with the same confusion. After 60, the body does not simply grow weaker, it changes in ways that demand gentler care and deeper attention. What once nourished us can begin to wound us quietly. Foods we believed were allies in youth may shift into obstacles, lingering in the stomach, inflaming the joints, robbing the bones of strength. Aisha's struggle with her morning spoon was not an isolated moment. It was a message, her body whispering what science too often overlooks. For months, she tried to ignore it. She kept the tomatoes in her soups, the raw spinach in her salads, the peppers in her stir-fry because that was what she had always done. But the stiffness returned heavier each time. Nights brought restless turning, mornings began with aching knees that no longer trusted the stairs. She confided in her daughter, who suggested perhaps it was simply age catching up. Yet deep inside, Aisha felt that wasn't the whole truth. There had to be something she could do, something more than wait for the slow march of decline. It was then that she began a quiet experiment, guided not by rigid diets or flashy health trends, but by careful listening. She set aside certain foods, not out of fear, but curiosity, and she welcomed others that brought warmth and comfort to her body in unexpected ways. Slowly, the fog began to lift. Her mornings no longer felt like battles against stiffness. Her hands, once reluctant, began to move with greater ease, and perhaps most importantly, her spirit shifted. She realized she was not powerless, that aging was not a sentence, but an invitation to adapt. I tell you this, not to frighten you, but to remind you of a simple truth. Your body speaks, even in whispers. Aisha's story is one of many, but it carries a message for all of us who are entering the later chapters of life. The foods on your plate are not neutral. They are either helping you rise each morning with clarity and strength, or they are slowly dimming the flame within. In the minutes ahead, I want to walk with you through her journey, what she let go of, what she embraced, and how her choices reshaped not just her health, but her hope. Aisha's mornings had always followed a quiet rhythm. She woke before the sun, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and made her way to the small wooden table by the window. A bowl of oatmeal, a handful of fruit, and a steaming cup of tea were her daily companions. On this morning, the air outside was cool, carrying the smell of wet earth from the previous night's rain. She lifted her spoon, expecting the same comfort she had known for decades. But instead, her fingers betrayed her. The spoon slipped, clattering against the porcelain, and for a moment she sat frozen, staring at her own hand as though it belonged to someone else. It wasn't the first time she felt something was wrong. For months, stiffness had crept into her joints, particularly in the mornings. At first she told herself it was harmless, just age settling in like an unwelcome guest. But this time, with her spoon trembling on the table, the truth pressed harder. She could no longer deny the quiet rebellion inside her body. Her knuckles ached with a dull heat, and the grip that once cradled her grandchildren with ease now struggled with the simplest of tasks. Later that week, she found herself sitting in the doctor's office, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. The doctor leaned back in his chair, his expression one of detached routine. "It's arthritis," he said gently, though without surprise. "It's common after 60, nothing unusual here." He offered her medication, painkillers to dull the discomfort. Aisha nodded politely, but her heart sank. The doctor's words didn't soothe her. Instead, they sounded like a life sentence. This is what aging is. This is what you must live with. Yet a part of her resisted. Was it really just age, or was her body trying to tell her something more specific? That night, she lay awake, listening to the ticking of the old clock on her bedroom wall. She remembered her grandmother's hands, twisted with pain in her later years, and a chill ran through her. But Aisha also remembered something else. Her grandmother often spoke of foods that fed the fire of inflammation. Back then, Aisha brushed it off as old-world superstition. Now, with her own hands throbbing in the dark, those words returned, heavy and insistent. Perhaps wisdom sometimes lingers in whispers, waiting for us to grow old enough to listen. The following morning, Aisha made a small decision, almost hesitant in its simplicity. She would begin watching what she ate, not with the blind faith she once carried, but with the curiosity of someone listening closely to a body that had carried her for 71 years. She didn't know yet which foods were friends and which were foes, but she felt deep in her bones that change was possible. What the doctor had offered her was only relief. What she sought was restoration. And in that quiet resolve, her journey began. It was a Sunday afternoon when Aisha first noticed the pattern. She had prepared her favorite dish, a simple lentil soup brightened with ripe tomatoes from the market. The smell filled her kitchen, warm and familiar, a comfort she had leaned on for years. She ate with gratitude, savoring the tangy richness of the broth, but that night, as she slipped into bed, the stiffness returned. Her knees throbbed with a slow, persistent ache, and her hands refused to relax. She shifted from side to side, the sheets tangling around her legs, sleep dancing just out of reach. The following morning, she brushed off the discomfort, but 2 days later, after another meal of tomato-based curry, the pain was sharper, her fingers more swollen. She sat back, puzzled, recalling her grandmother's warning about foods that set fire in the joints. Could it be the tomatoes? The thought startled her. How could something so bright, so fresh, so celebrated as healthy be the source of such heaviness? She didn't want to believe it, but the possibility lodged itself in her mind like a seed waiting to sprout. At her next doctor's visit, she mentioned her suspicions. The doctor, kind but brisk, smiled faintly. "There isn't much research that shows tomatoes are harmful," he said. "In fact, they're rich in antioxidants, very good for most people." Aisha nodded, but the words felt hollow. "Most people," she repeated silently. But what about her? Her body was not a statistic. It was her lived experience. She couldn't ignore the whispers it was giving her, even if no study had yet written them down. One evening, her daughter came by to drop off groceries. Aisha confessed her doubts. Her daughter laughed softly. "Ma, tomatoes are healthy. You've been eating them your whole life." Aisha smiled, though quietly unsettled. She wanted to explain that the body at 71 was not the body at 30, that digestion shifts, that strength and weakness play by different rules. But she let the moment pass. Sometimes she realized change begins alone, so she began a quiet test. For 1 week, she avoided tomatoes, no soups, no curries, no fresh slices in her salad. She replaced them with warming spices, ginger, and lightly cooked vegetables. By the end of the week, the fire in her joints had dulled, not gone, but softened, like a storm drifting further out to sea. It was enough for her to see the connection, and in that realization, something inside her shifted. She was no longer simply enduring pain, she was beginning to understand it. Aisha had always believed salads were the epitome of health. Fresh, crisp, alive with color, they had been her staple since her 30s. Spinach was her favorite. She would wash the leaves carefully, lay them in a bowl, and scatter almonds and a squeeze of lemon over the top. It felt light, wholesome, and exactly what a woman of her age should eat. But lately, the salads left her feeling strangely heavy, her stomach tight and unsettled, as though the food had lingered too long instead of nourishing her. One afternoon, she prepared her usual spinach salad before visiting her granddaughter. The meal should have given her energy, but halfway through the visit, she felt an uncomfortable ache in her lower back and a fog settling across her mind. She tried to smile and keep her focus, but her joints pulsed with a dull heat and her body asked for rest. When she finally returned home, she sat by the window, puzzled. Why would something so clean and simple drain her so deeply? The memory of her doctor's words returned. Eat more leafy greens. She almost laughed aloud. It wasn't helping, it was hurting. A quiet frustration bubbled up inside her. She thought of the spoon that slipped from her hand, the aching nights after tomato soups, and now the leaden fatigue after spinach. Each time she was told these foods were good for her. but her body kept telling her a different story. Which voice was she supposed to trust? That evening, she decided to do something she rarely allowed herself. She searched through books and quiet corners of the internet. The word that kept appearing was oxalates, tiny compounds hidden in spinach that, in younger bodies, are easily filtered out. But as kidneys grow older, these compounds can build into sharp crystals, irritating the joints, disturbing digestion, even drawing minerals away from the bones. Suddenly, her experience began to make sense. It wasn't weakness, it was chemistry, and her body was simply no longer built to handle it the way it once had. She remembered her grandmother again, how she used to boil her greens, never serving them raw. Back then, Aisha thought it was just a cultural habit, a preference for warm foods. Now she wondered if there had been wisdom hidden in those choices. Perhaps the old ways were not primitive at all, but deeply attuned to the rhythms of aging bodies. For the first time in months, she felt not defeated, but curious, even hopeful. If removing spinach could lighten her pain, what else might shift if she learned to listen more closely? Bell peppers had always brightened Aisha's meals. Their colors, red, yellow, green, were like small lanterns scattered across her kitchen table. She loved the crunch, the way they softened in a pan of stir-fry, the sweetness they added to salads. For years, she believed they were her allies, filled with antioxidants and praised in every article she read about healthy eating. But one evening, after sharing a simple dinner of sautéed peppers and rice with her neighbor, the night unfolded differently. Her stomach bloated, heavy and restless, as though a knot had been tied deep within. By morning, her joints throbbed again, her knees reluctant to bend as she rose from bed. She moved slowly through her home, every step weighted. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but she had never connected the dots. This time, though, the memory of her tomato and spinach struggles pressed against her. Could the peppers be speaking the same language of quiet harm? When her daughter visited later that week, Aisha mentioned her suspicion. Her daughter frowned, gently shaking her head. "Peppers are full of vitamins, Ma. They're good for you." Aisha smiled, but deep inside, she knew her body could no longer be ignored. Later, while preparing tea, she remembered her doctor once mentioning that peppers, like tomatoes, belonged to the nightshade family. She hadn't thought much of it then. Now the word carried weight. Nightshade, a shadow lingering beneath the skin of something bright. Curiosity nudged her toward research once again. She learned that bell peppers, beyond their vibrant surface, carried compounds that could irritate sensitive joints. And more troubling still, they often ranked high on lists of pesticide-laden produce. Her liver, already weary with age, was not the agile filter it had once been. Each bite, though small, added to a burden that her body struggled to release. The thought was unsettling, yet it also explained what she felt, why clarity in her mind sometimes dulled after meals, why her energy dipped without warning. The realization deepened when she visited her neighbor, Mrs. Khan, an 82-year-old who had always sworn by her daily pepper salads. Aisha noticed the swelling in Mrs. Khan's fingers, the stiffness in her walk, and heard her complaints of constant bloating. With hesitation, Aisha shared her own experiment, removing the peppers for just a few weeks. Mrs. Khan agreed to try. Weeks later, her neighbor's eyes lit up with a quiet relief. The swelling had softened, her digestion was calmer, her steps, though still slow, were lighter. For Aisha, this was no longer just theory, it was lived truth, echoing in the lives around her. That evening, as she cooked, she set the peppers aside, choosing instead a handful of warm spices and root vegetables. She thought of how traditions in old cultures often discouraged raw or cold foods for the elderly, favoring cooked, warming meals instead. It struck her then, perhaps wisdom isn't always written in research papers. Sometimes it is written in the silent language of the body, in the patterns noticed by those who have walked the path of age before us. Aisha felt a deep peace wash over her, not of giving something up, but of letting her body be heard at last. It was a cool morning when Aisha first reached for ginger, almost by instinct. The market stall was filled with earthy roots, their rough skin dusted with soil, their scent sharp and alive. She remembered how her grandmother used to grate fresh ginger into soups during the winter, saying it warmed the blood. Back then, Aisha had dismissed it as an old saying, something poetic but unscientific. Yet now, after weeks of removing foods that weighed her down, she felt drawn to this simple root as though her body was guiding her hand. That evening, she sliced a thin piece and dropped it into her cup of hot water. As the steam curled upward, a fragrance filled the air, spicy, clean, almost electric. She sipped slowly, letting the warmth travel down her throat. It was subtle at first, but within minutes she felt her fingers loosen, her palms no longer icy as they so often were in the mornings. There was a quiet comfort in that warmth, not forced, not jolting like caffeine, but gentle, like a small flame rekindled deep inside her. The days that followed confirmed what her body had whispered. With each cup of ginger tea, her digestion seemed lighter, her energy steadier. She no longer felt the fog descending so heavily in the afternoons. Her circulation, once sluggish, seemed to awaken. She noticed it one afternoon while walking to the garden. Her steps felt freer, her legs warmer, her breath smoother. It wasn't a miracle, it was a shift, steady and believable, as if her body was remembering how to flow. When her daughter visited, Aisha shared her new ritual. Her daughter, skeptical but curious, tasted the ginger tea herself. "It's strong," she said, her face scrunching at the spice. Aisha smiled, strong but kind. They laughed, and for the first time in months, the conversation around food felt less like debate and more like discovery. Aisha wasn't rejecting health advice or clinging to superstition. She was finding her own balance, listening to what her body welcomed. Her doctor, during her next appointment, seemed surprised when Aisha mentioned the ginger. "Well, it does have anti-inflammatory properties," he admitted, "and it can aid circulation. If it helps, there's no harm." For Aisha, that was enough. She didn't need scientific certainty written in textbooks. She had her hands, her legs, her breath, and they told her more than studies ever could. That night, she sat by the window again, tea steaming in her hand, watching the stars blink awake in the sky. Her joints still ached sometimes, but the pain no longer defined her days. She felt something she hadn't in a long time, hope, fragile yet steady, carried in the warmth of a root that had been with her all along. The sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor in the late morning, warming the tiles beneath Aisha's feet. She had always loved this golden hour when shadows leaned long and the world seemed softer. Today, she carried a basket of sweet potatoes and a small jar of fermented cabbage from the market, a curious mix that her neighbor had insisted she try. The earthy sweetness of the potatoes paired with the tangy bite of the cabbage felt unusual at first, but something in her gut, still learning, nudged her forward. She peeled, chopped, and set them simmering in a gentle broth, inhaling the comforting aroma as it filled the room. As she stirred, she remembered her journey, the mornings of stiff joints, the evenings of restless sleep, the quiet anxiety that had whispered through her days. Each small step had led her here. Lemons that cleared her mornings, spinach that lifted her spirits, blueberries that sparked memory, ginger that warmed her hands, and now these humble roots and leaves that promised renewal. She realized it wasn't any single food or drink that had changed her life. It was the act of listening, of responding, of honoring what her body needed. Her daughter came to sit beside her, curious and watchful. "It smells alive," she said. Aisha chuckled softly, feeling the warmth in her chest. "It's alive," she agreed, "and so are we, even when we forget." They ate slowly, letting the textures and flavors linger. The sweet potato melted softly on the tongue, while the fermented cabbage added a punch of life, a reminder of resilience and transformation hidden in ordinary things. Later that evening, she rested in her chair by the window, the sky painted in soft violet. Her limbs, once stiff and hesitant, now moved freely, carrying her with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The aches hadn't vanished completely, they were part of her story, but they no longer defined it. Aisha's eyes sparkled with gratitude for small victories, for her curiosity, her patience, and the quiet courage to try something new each day. She realized that true wellness wasn't a destination. It was the ongoing dialogue between her heart, her mind, and her body. Her doctor had smiled knowingly at her latest checkup. "You're making choices that nourish not just your body, but your life," he said. It wasn't a lecture, it was recognition, a gentle nod to the wisdom she had cultivated herself. Aisha felt the same pride, not in perfection, but in the perseverance to keep seeking what worked, to honor the whispers of her body and the love that guided her hands. As night settled, she sipped a final cup of ginger tea, the steam curling around her fingers like a warm embrace. She thought of the journey, the small, deliberate steps that had carried her from discomfort to comfort, from uncertainty to quiet confidence. In the gentle glow of the evening, Aisha understood the deepest truth she had uncovered. Life, even after 60, can be rich, flavorful, and full of surprises when you listen, care, and nourish yourself with intention. Aisha woke to the gentle hum of morning, the kind of quiet that felt like a soft embrace rather than an empty room. She stretched slowly, noticing the way her body responded. No stiffness, no reluctance, only a graceful ease that made her smile. It was a small miracle she had earned, not through magic, but through countless mindful choices. Sipping lemon water, tasting fresh blueberries, moving gently each day, and welcoming the odd, nourishing foods she once overlooked. Her garden had become a sanctuary. Tiny green shoots of herbs peeked through the soil, and the sunlight caught the dew like scattered jewels. She knelt beside the plants, feeling the dirt warm beneath her palms, and thought of how life, much like these little seedlings, needed patience, care, and attention. Each healthy habit she adopted was another seed she had planted for herself, and now the harvest was visible not just in her body but in her spirit. Her grandson, curious as ever, bounded into the garden. "Grandma, can I help?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. Aisha laughed, a soft, melodious sound, and handed him a small trowel. Together they worked side by side, sharing stories, laughter, and the kind of simple presence that healed in ways no supplement or pill could. She realized that true health was more than physical. It was the moments of connection, the laughter, and the joy that flowed when she fully engaged with life. Later, she prepared a simple meal: roasted carrots with a hint of cinnamon, a drizzle of olive oil, and a small serving of fermented beet salad. Each bite reminded her that healing wasn't a single act. It was the gentle accumulation of choices, flavors, and moments. She savored the earthy sweetness of the carrots, the tangy depth of the beets, and the warmth that spread from her stomach to her chest. Every meal became a ritual, a celebration of vitality rather than a chore. As dusk approached, Aisha sat in her favorite chair, wrapped in a soft shawl, and reflected on the past months. The aches, the restless nights, the fleeting anxiety, all had taught her something invaluable: to listen, to adapt, and to embrace the quiet joys of everyday life. Her doctor's words echoed in her mind, gentle yet firm. Wellness is a journey, not a final destination. She understood now that each day offered a new opportunity to nourish her body, mind, and heart. Finally, she closed her eyes and inhaled the soft evening air, carrying the scent of herbs, soil, and the faintest hint of baked sweet potato from the kitchen. Gratitude filled her chest, a calm, abiding sense that she had learned to love herself fully, in body and in spirit. And in that quiet, luminous moment, Aisha smiled, knowing that life's richest gifts were often the simplest ones: good food, gentle movement, and the presence of those we love. The morning sun spilled softly through Aisha's kitchen window, painting golden streaks across her table. She sipped a warm cup of chamomile tea, feeling the calmness settle deep into her chest. Life had a rhythm now, one she had learned to follow rather than fight. Each sunrise was no longer just a beginning of chores or obligations. It was an invitation to care for herself, to notice the subtle signals of her body, and to cherish the small victories of everyday health. Her reflection in the window made her pause. The lines on her face told stories, some of struggle, some of laughter, but all of them spoke of resilience. Aisha thought back to the early days of her journey, the stiff mornings, the anxious thoughts, and the endless questions about what was safe to eat or how to move. Now there was clarity. She understood that the body responded beautifully to consistency, gentle encouragement, and a touch of curiosity. No drastic measures, no rigid routines, just mindful choices, repeated with love and patience. Later, she walked through her neighborhood park, greeting familiar faces with a soft wave and a smile. The simple act of moving outdoors brought her joy, a reminder that wellness wasn't confined to the kitchen or the gym, but lived in every breath, every step, every shared glance. She noticed other seniors, some cautious, some energetic, and silently hoped they too would discover the quiet empowerment that came from tuning into their bodies, respecting their limits, and choosing nourishment that healed. Back home, she tended to her small bookshelf, placing a new journal beside a worn, beloved cookbook. Writing had become another gentle practice, a place to note observations, emotions, and tiny triumphs. Sometimes she recorded the effects of a new fruit, a walk, or a sleep ritual. Other times, she wrote letters to her grandchildren, sharing stories that carried subtle lessons in patience, care, and self-love. Each word reinforced what she had discovered. Health wasn't just about avoiding illness, it was about creating a life that felt vibrant, full, and meaningful. As the day faded, Aisha prepared a simple dinner of steamed leafy greens, roasted sweet potatoes, and a small handful of walnuts. She ate slowly, savoring each flavor, each texture, each nutrient that quietly supported her body. There was a meditation in this ritual, a reminder that even the smallest habits, like chewing mindfully, hydrating fully, or reaching for colorful, fresh foods, could ripple into profound changes over time. Finally, sitting by her window as the stars emerged, Aisha breathed deeply, feeling gratitude for her journey, her family, and the newfound confidence that came with knowledge and practice. She realized that true wellness was not a destination, but a tapestry woven from countless small decisions, tender moments, and unwavering self-respect. And she smiled, knowing that every viewer who listened to her story might take away one small habit, one gentle change, that could quietly transform their own life, just as hers had been transformed. Aisha settled into her favorite armchair, the one by the bay window that caught the afternoon light just right. She watched the leaves flutter in the gentle breeze, their motion simple, yet alive. Her mind wandered to the months past, the mornings of soreness and hesitation, the afternoons of doubt, and the quiet nights spent wondering if she could ever feel truly strong again. What she realized now was that strength wasn't only measured by the absence of pain or fatigue, but by the courage to notice, to adjust, and to honor her body's messages. She remembered a particular day at the market when a bright red pomegranate had caught her eye. Something about it had drawn her in, not just visually, but as if her body was quietly signaling a need she hadn't acknowledged before. That day, she began choosing foods not only for taste, but for the gentle energy and nourishment they provided. Pomegranates became a small ritual, cutting into the ruby seeds, savoring their tart sweetness, and recognizing that each bite was a silent act of care. It was not about restriction or fear, it was about attunement and respect. Later, during a stroll around her neighborhood, she felt a familiar twinge in her knees. Instead of frustration, she paused and smiled. She had learned to listen, not resist. Gentle stretches, short walks, and mindful breathing became her new companions, whispering that mobility was not guaranteed but could be nurtured with patience. Even in discomfort, there was discovery. Even in limitation, there was agency. The old fear of being too old or too fragile had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that her choices mattered more than her doubts. In the evenings, when her grandchildren visited, Aisha found herself sharing these small lessons, not through lecturing, but through stories, laughter, and the occasional shared snack of berries or nuts. She saw in their wide eyes the reflection of curiosity and wonder, reminding her that the body and mind thrived on gentle habits and joyful engagement. She understood now that personal transformation wasn't about dramatic overnight shifts, but about hundreds of tiny, conscious moments that accumulated quietly, invisibly into a resilient and vibrant life. As she prepared her herbal tea, she realized that her inner compass had shifted. No longer was she reacting to fear or symptoms alone. She was proactively seeking what nurtured her, aware of her limits, yet willing to explore new habits. Her body had become a partner, not a puzzle. She smiled, sensing a harmony that was as much emotional as it was physical, a rhythm of care, awareness, and self-compassion that she hoped everyone could discover. Morning sunlight spilled through Aisha's kitchen window, warming the wooden countertop where a fresh plate of fruit awaited her. She paused, hands resting lightly on the edge, breathing in the quiet rhythm of the house. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint chirping of birds outside, the distant laughter of neighbors, all these ordinary sounds felt extraordinary now. Each moment reminded her of how far she had come and how even the smallest decisions, what to eat, how to move, how to pause, had gradually reshaped not only her body, but her spirit. She thought back to the doctor's words months ago, the warning that had first awakened her concern. Back then, they had felt heavy, almost impossible to fully embrace. But today, those words served as a gentle compass, guiding her toward choices that honored her life rather than restricting it. Even the simplest habits, a morning stretch, a sip of warm lemon water, a handful of berries, had begun to accumulate into something transformative. Her health was no longer a list of rules or fears, It was a living dialogue between her body and her awareness. During her walk in the garden, she noticed how the sunlight fell on the flowers, making their petals glow. She bent to gently touch a blossom, feeling its delicate texture against her fingertips. It struck her then, care for oneself is like tending a garden. With patience, observation, and gentle nurturing, even fragile beginnings can bloom into strength and vitality. She smiled, realizing that this care extended beyond her own life. It was an inheritance of habits, mindset, and respect that she could quietly pass on to her children and grandchildren. At breakfast, her grandchildren ran into the kitchen, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Aisha joined them at the table, savoring not just the food, but the moment itself. Each bite of the vibrant fruit, each sip of herbal tea felt like a celebration of her choices, the mindful steps that had brought her here. She remembered times of struggle, aches, and doubt, and recognized the invisible thread that had guided her through them. Awareness, patience, and a willingness to embrace change, however gradual. Later, as she reflected quietly by the bay window, Aisha realized that the journey she had begun with fear had blossomed into empowerment. She no longer chased fleeting remedies or panicked at minor symptoms. Instead, she had cultivated habits that sustained her energy, eased her body, and nourished her mind. She had learned that transformation was not about dramatic leaps, but about consistent, loving attention to the rhythms of life. And in that gentle consistency, she had discovered freedom, the freedom to live fully with curiosity, compassion, and resilience. Before she rose to tend to the day, Aisha whispered to herself, a soft promise of continuity. She would carry this awareness forward, letting each small choice ripple into tomorrow. Her heart felt lighter, her steps steadier, and her mind calm. The journey had begun with a spark of concern, but it had led her to a horizon full of possibility, health, and quiet joy. She smiled, knowing that each sunrise now was not just another day, but a testament to mindful living and self-care, a dawn she had earned and cherished. As the evening sun cast its warm glow over her kitchen, Aisha reflected on the remarkable journey she had undertaken. What had begun as quiet worry over lingering aches and restless nights had transformed into a life of mindful choices and gentle self-care. She no longer hurried through meals or ignored her body's signals. Instead, she embraced nourishing foods, simple daily movements, and small rituals that strengthened both her body and her spirit. The fear that once clouded her mornings had been replaced with awareness and gratitude for each new day. Her energy had returned in ways she hadn't imagined. Her steps were steadier, her moods lighter, and even the tiniest tasks felt easier. But perhaps the most profound change was in her mindset. Aisha had learned to listen, not just to her body, but to the rhythm of life itself. She understood that transformation didn't require dramatic shifts or rigid routines. It grew quietly through consistency, patience, and small, intentional choices. The warmth of family, the joy of simple pleasures, and the calm of mindful living had woven themselves into her everyday life, leaving her stronger, calmer, and more present. Watching her grandchildren play, Aisha felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that taking care of herself wasn't just about adding years to her life, it was about enriching every moment she lived, so that each day could be savored fully. And now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she offered a quiet invitation to anyone watching. Begin gently, choose wisely, and honor your body with care. Even the smallest step can ripple into lasting change. With a soft smile, Aisha whispered to herself, and to all who might hear, every mindful choice is a gift, and every day holds the promise of a brighter, healthier tomorrow.